Hi guys, and welcome to your video class. Today we are going to be making a celestial sun hanging decoration out of cardboard and paper mache. Now, I've literally got an offcut of cardboard here. I ripped the side off of a cardboard box. So that's what I'm working with. I have a small tea plate. You could use a saucer. You could even make them smaller. You could make them, sort of roll of sellotape size. You can make them as big or as small as you want. I'm going to go with this size for today. So that's going to be our main sun face, and we're going to obviously have the rays coming off the side. I also have my trusty masking tape. I have a bunch of kitchen roll. Just like last time, so it's been split into two sheets and just ripped up into squares, rectangles, strips, whatever you want. My tin foil. I have my jar of paper mache stuff. So this, remember, is glue, water, and in mine is white acrylic paint. It's not essential, but it helps it to dry whiter. I have my gluing brush, my trusty gluing brush. For applying it, and I have a marker pen just for drawing. Now you guys could use a felt tip pen, you could even use a pencil, but obviously I want the camera to pick up the lines that I'm drawing, so I'll use the marker so that you can see it. Okay, now I should make one thing clear. I haven't created these before as a workshop, so I'm very much going to be making this up as I go along. Obviously, the principles of paper mache are straightforward, so it's literally just working out how to construct the face and then show you how to do it. So we're going to do it as we go. We are going to start by placing our tea plate, saucer, whatever round thing you have, in the middle of our cardboard. Bearing in mind you need space all around the edges for the rays, and we're just going to draw around it. And then we remove that and put it to one side and give it a wash later because I now have permanent marker on it. And then we're going to create the rays. Now, if you want, you can find something triangular, or you could just kind of create a small triangular template out of an offcut of cardboard if you wanted to have more kind of pointed sun rays. But quite often with a lot of the really sort of pretty celestial designs that you see, the rays actually are kind of wavy rather than all one uniformed triangular shape. And so I'm going to create almost like flower petals, these kind of like petal shaped rays on the outside. This is just to get you your basic shape. They don't all have to be exactly the same size and shape. They are sun rays after all. So a little bit like our sunflowers that we were painting. Okay, we'll just make that one a bit bigger. Now bear in mind, you're not going to see these lines because they're going to be covered up. So this is just our design to work with. Now what we want to bear in mind is kind of what features we're going to be putting onto the sun. So normally with the celestial type suns, you have a defined nose that comes down, and the eyebrow or the brow bone is fairly clear, and then in here you're going to have this kind of cut out space where the eyes are going to go, and obviously how you finish the nose is up to you. You could have it just kind of coming across like so, or you could add little roundy bits for the nostrils. It's up to you. You can make it really as fancy or as simple as you want, and then obviously you're going to want a smile, a mouth at the bottom. So that's our general layout, but also when we're building up the layers, remember that around here in this kind of area, there tends to be a built up place where kind of like the cheekbones, a little bit like where you would apply blusher on the cheek. So that's going to be slightly raised, a little bit like like half a golf ball just kind of sticking out, as is the nose and the lips. You know, they're all going to be raised from our flat background. But at least if you've got this basic design, you know kind of roughly where you're going to be adding things to. So what we're going to do is we're going to use tinfoil and masking tape to start building up some of these areas. And then obviously as we add the paper mache on top, we can add in some more detail and give it some more definition. And then obviously we're going to paint it, which we can then add more shadows in. We can add in more details again. Okay, so at this point, what you want to do is grab yourself some scissors. Or if you have a grown-up helping you, they might choose to use a knife. But we're going to cut out all of these rays all the way around to the edge. So I'm going to go ahead and do that just now, and I'll be back with you in just a minute. So there we have our cutout sun shape. So we're going to be using our tin foil to create some lines basically. We don't have to completely fill it, but you can add as much or as little as you want to. So we start by taking some foil, and I'm going to create basically the outline that we have here with the eyebrows and part of the nose. So I'm going to kind of scrunch up a little roll of tin foil and roll it fairly tight, because remember from last time, the tighter that you squeeze it and the tighter it's packed together, the harder it will be. So you've got a stronger foundation for putting your paper mache on. Your paper mache won't flex as much, it won't be so soft, it will help to give it a really solid base. So there we go, we have our chunky bit of foil here, and what I'm going to do is just using my fingers and my thumb, just kind of shape it to a kind of eyebrow shape and hold that in place. I'm going to follow my guidelines that I have drawn for our sun's nose. Around the bottom and back over. Now, could adjust it slightly. I might just be able to get it out of this piece. If you have to add a second piece, you can just add it on. It's not an issue. But there we go. I think we're just about there. So we've got our shape. So like we did last time, we're just going to use some masking tape and hold it in place. I'm going to open it up just a little bit so that I can put that piece on. Just kind of work my way down, securing it every inch or two. Again, if you've got sort of standard masking tape like that one, that should be absolutely fine for this. If you have the narrow stuff, then you can use that too. Okay, so now remember, when you're putting your tape on, try and keep it as close to the foil as possible. So at the moment, unless you're intending on creating a gap or need it to sort of fill a gap, then you can have the masking tape wider. But for this, we want the tape to be kind of fairly snug against our lines, because these are quite clear, defined lines that we're creating. Okay, and then I'm going to do a similar thing with the eyes. Now, I would like to add the actual eyeballs onto this one, but I also want there to be definition of where the outside of the eyes is. So, you get some foil and let's start creating an eyeball to go in there. Literally just screw it up into a ball. It's about the right sort of size. Gonna squash it down a bit. There we go, that's better. So basically what I've done is, with that first one, I've created a kind of a ball shape and then just flattened it down so that it's still standing out from the surface. It's still round on the edges, but it's kind of flat on the surface so that it's not sticking out too far. So we'll come back to our masking tape, and I'm just thinking, so you've got options here again. You could actually use a similar technique to this, but use smaller pieces to define the eyes, which may be worth doing, but we'll mask these in. So obviously at the moment I'm thinking ahead to where the paper mache is going to be going and what that's going to be doing and how we can use that and the way that it'll lay to our advantage. So we stick our eyeballs on. Now, I want to create a thin tube, a thinner tube than the first one we created. So I'm using a smaller piece of foil and I'm going to keep twisting it until it's as thin as I need it to be. Trying to keep it fairly even. Now, so we've got this really thin piece, which hopefully we can then kind of turn into this eye shape. So it's going to sit around the eyeball. In fact, what I'm going to do is kind of fold it in half to give this a more pointed corner, and then open it up again. Obviously this is, when it's wound tight like this, it's almost like wire. It's nice and bendy, and that's going to sit in between the eyeball and the eyebrow. It looks kind of messy and cluttered just now, but see, once you've got your paper mache on there, it's all going to start coming together, and obviously with your paint that you're going to paint over it, it's going to look much more like an eyeball sitting in place. So I'm going to tape that in place. Obviously, remember, we want the two ends to be stuck together. And then, because I have a bit of excess here, I'm just going to put that over the eyebrow too. So it holds that end of our eye in place. We're going to do the same for this end. So we're going to put our tape down, tuck it in, over the ends, tuck it in again, and over the eyebrow. Making sure everything's getting stuck down nicely. If you've got a paintbrush or something, mind you, you have smaller fingers than me probably, so you'll be able to kind of poke at them in the right places, but you can just make sure that everything is where you want it to be and that the tape's all stuck down nicely. I'm going to put another bit in the middle, tucking in between where our eye's outline and the eyeball is, and then doing the same on the other side, tucking it in on the other side of the eyeball, and then tucking it in over the outside of the outline of the eyeball. There we go. Now at this point, because there isn't much of the eye left, there's only some small parts of foil sticking out, I would tend to cover that with masking tape, just where the foil parts are. Now where it's just blank cardboard, you don't need to tape over that. Unless you are using cardboard that has print on it. If you're using I don't know, like a cereal box or something, if you wanted to try and cover some of that colour, then you could tape over it. But for this, what we're basically going to do is just cover the foil, so that when we go in with the paper mache is sticking to this kind of papery tape rather than trying to stick to the aluminium. But as you can hopefully already see, as I'm putting this piece on, there's definition there where the edge of our eye is. You can see this outline along the bottom, and you can actually see the definition of where the eyeball is in the middle. so it's all coming together. So I'm just going to pop a couple of bits of tape in there just to cover those parts. And every time you add tape, just make sure that it's pressed down really well, that you've got the ends. Occasionally an end might come unstuck while you're working on a different part, so just go back and just stick it down. And that's the last little bit there. Okay. So let me show you. So hopefully you can see there, as we go in and add the tape, as we go in and add the paper mache, we can kind of build that up. You can give more definition to these lines, but also when you paint it, you'll be able to define them more. So this is coming together nicely. So we're going to go ahead and do the same on the other side. We're going to get our other bit of foil. We're going to create that really tight kind of wire-like piece to outline this eyeball with, and we're going to tape it into place. So just twisting that. Twist, 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 making your foil twiglet. The same as I did before, just kind of give it a pinch when it's folded in half. And then kind of round off the middle, because that's going to go over there. I'm going to tape the open end into place. Excess over the eyebrow. Coming over this side and tape this end in, pushing the tape down in between all of the parts, and then over the eyebrow and down. We'll just do the same as we did before, just fill in the gaps around the eyes, the gaps in the middle. Using it, if you've got a thumbnail, you can kind of dig it in around the eyeball just to help you see the lines, see where the bits are. Get your finger in there and push the tape down. There is another way of constructing things with paper mache, which I almost did for this one. However, it is a lot messier because it basically involves having a bowl full of your glue and water solution and dunking bigger pieces of kitchen roll into it, soaking them and kind of squeezing them out in your hand and using them, kind of molding the bigger pieces to kind of do what we're doing with the foil. You can do that. The only thing is, as I say, it's more messy because it's more hands-on because you've got your hand in the glue and you're kind of playing with the kitchen roll when it's wet to mold it to the shapes that you want. But also the downside of that is because you are working with larger pieces of wet material, it takes even longer to dry. So Doing it this way, you can use a radiator or a hairdryer to kind of speed up the drying process. If you use the other method where you're literally soaking it and dumping it down in big wads, then it definitely has to be left at least overnight, if not for kind of 24 hours before you can work with it again. So that's why for now, I'm doing these classes for you using this method, because whilst it might be a little bit fiddlier to get started, once you've got these basic shapes down, the rest of the process and the drying process so that you can get to the painting and get it finished is a lot faster. So I am trying to think of you guys and the easiest ways for you to work. However, if you do want me to show you the other method at some point, then let me know, and you know, we'll work it into a class at some point, and I'll show you. But just be warned, you will definitely need to have table coverings down, because that paper mache mix is just going to drip everywhere. It's inevitable. There's no way of doing it sort of cleanly. Okay, so by this point, you should have your eyes sorted. Now I've got a little bit of foil peeking through on the top of that one, so I'd say we just want to cover the foil. So we'll go ahead and stick a piece on there. Put it down, Amy. See, I try and hold it up to the camera to show you, but then it ends up making it just a lot harder. So there we go, that's that part covered. We've got our two eyes, we've got our eyeballs, our eyebrows, so they're pretty much covered. Now with the nose, it's up to you. You can either keep it as an outline, or you can kind of do what we did with the eyes, and fill in this kind of like the bulbous part, like the end of the nose, if you like. It's kind of like making a sausage of sorts, I suppose. Kind of want to make a shape a bit like a sausage that kind of fits in with the shape that you've created. Now obviously you can place it and mould it whilst it's kind of there, and sort of push it into place. And then that way, obviously because your nose does poke out, you can do that and just literally get some masking tape and mask over it to hold it in place. The big bit at the bottom all the way up. And just cover up any other little bits of foil that are showing through. Okay, so just like that, in a minute we've built up our son's nose, and it obviously kind of goes up to where his eyebrows are. I mean, you could actually have it so that it goes back down again, or you can just build in that part a little bit more with your paper mache. You can build more little bulbousy parts with the paper mache as well, but it's just to kind of give you that base so that his nose doesn't just, or her nose doesn't just disappear into the piece. So on here, again, we're just looking for kind of semicircles. Almost imagine if you had like a ping pong ball and you cut it in half and you stuck one onto each cheek. That's kind of what we're going for. So this kind of, this cheekbone underneath needs to kind of protrude a little bit to give us that detail.
Yeah. I'm not wrapping this too tightly just now. I want to try and gauge the size kind of before I commit too much. So yeah, that's about the size we want. So I'm going to crush it down a bit more. I'm going to bring the sides kind of down a little bit. So I'm kind of pinching the sides down rather than having them thick and chunky. Because that way the center kind of comes up, but it's more flush when we put it in place. Just play with it until you're happy with it. Bearing in mind, we're going to have tape over the little indentation bits, and we're going to have paper mache over it. As long as we've got the beginnings of our cheek sticking out, we'll be good. And again, back to the good old masking tape. Put it in place. Mask it down. You can either rip off the excess bit if there's a bit sticking out, or you can literally just keep going and just blend it in with the eye at the top, because it's all going to get covered with mache anyway, so make sure it's all firmly stuck. Like so. Same on the other side. Stick, hold, pinch it in, and just deal with that last bit of excess. Okay, so now you've got both the eyes and the cheeks and the nose. We need a mouth. Same principle, back to your foil. Now it's up to you if you want to do kind of two separate lips, or if you just want to do like one big one and kind of score a line down it, or even if you just want to, for the younger ones especially, just create like a smile. So just kind of doing what we did up here with the eyebrows and literally just creating a smile. That's perfectly acceptable. So I'm just kind of like, I've just rolled some loosely together and kind of want it to be sort of from cheek to, like from the center of the cheek to the center of the cheek kind of thing. That's sort of the length I'm working to. And I kind of want it to have a point. Just kind of play around with it a little bit. the bottom is generally going to be just that normal, like generic smile shape, like simple line smile shape. But if you are going to create the upper lip and give it some definition, you obviously need that kind of like that Cupid's bow part at the top, and the points that come off over the side. You kids are probably better at this than me. I'm just kind of making this up as I go. But look, so we'll try and make it as even as possible. This is only our base layer, so it's a little bit off center. Kind of creating that smile shape. And as we do the paper mache, what I'll do is I'll make sure that I create that sort of separation, that separate line between the top and bottom lips. I feel like there's just a little bit too much foil on this side. There we go. So just play around with it until you're happy with it. Till you've got your smiley face and go about sticking it on. Just digging my nail in there to get that definition of the bottom lip in place. Just pressing down all that tape. Now, if you wish to, you can start your paper macheing at this point. You can literally just put a layer over it and let it dry and paint it and just keep it nice and simple. However, for those of you who are more adventurous, what I'm going to be doing today is actually adding some definition to the sun's rays so that we can give them a bit of texture, so that it's not just lifted in the middle and just flat for the rest of it. So I'm going to use strips of foil and it's up to you. You can either kind of recreate the shape of the ray, so you could have it kind of chunkier at the bottom and narrower at the top, or you could just create a shape in the middle. What I'm probably going to do to keep things simple is to just kind of create a twister piece that we can use in the middle, because as we add paper mache, there can be some flat parts and the paper mache is going to lift some of it as well. So So we're going to work on lifting like the center of the rays. Again, it's not an exact science, just create some shapes. And you can just lay them down on there for now. Don't need to be really wide pieces. You only need small strips that you can just roll up and kind of make one end a bit pointy. You can tuck in the end if it's a bit too long. And you can just kind of shape them so that they fit in the middle of your cutouts. So there we go, we've got our spikes all done. So now it's just a case of going in and securing them with tape. And there we go. Hopefully you guys have stuck with me and you're managing to get your rays attached. They're all different. They're all pointing in different directions. They're all different shapes and sizes. That is just how it's meant to be. So making sure that all of your ends now where we've just gone around are all stuck down. The next step is to apply our first layer of paper mache. So I want you to grab your paper mache mix, grab your paintbrush and get yourself a big wodge of thinned out kitchen roll pieces. And I'll be back in just a minute. Okay, so now we have our paper mache mix and our brush and our tissue paper or our kitchen roll. So as we did last time, I'll show you again what we're going to do. We're going to start in the center and we're going to work our way out. So we're going to work on the facial features first and then work on the spikes. And the main reason for doing that is so that when you're lifting it and moving it, you still have somewhere dry and clean to hold it. Although most of this, for the most part, will be able to be done with it just laying on the table.
because we're only working with the only raised parts we have are on the facial features. So it's not like the pots where we were having to kind of constantly turn it around. So we're going into the paper mache mix, and we're going to start just laying down some of the mixture around the left eye. We're poking the brush right in there into all of the little crevices and creases. Making sure it doesn't drip on the table, on the eyeball, underneath the eyeball. Just kind of putting a layer down. And then we're going to grab a piece of our kitchen roll, and then using our brush, tap down so that it sticks to the glue that we've put down. And if you need to, just go in and get a little bit more and go over the top so that it's nice and soaked in our glue mixture. Just press it down, keep tapping it down. Especially in the creases, you really want to push it down into all of the little lines, because we want to have that definition. Remember where we've got these lines at the top and bottom of the eye? We want those to really kind of show up. So we want to make sure that when we are pressing down, that we're getting all of the creases. We're kind of creating that definition that we were talking about earlier. Just work away around the eye with all of your little bits, pushing them down, tapping them down. Just keep adding it, more squares, making sure you cover all of the little gaps. Now bear in mind, we will add a second coat if it's needed. So if you do happen to miss any tiny areas, you can always go back in and just add to them. As it starts to dry, you'll see any bits that you've missed. And it tends to happen, even when I'm doing it, I still miss bits, because obviously the more white that you're adding, the harder it becomes to see the bits that don't have anything on them yet. That's why all of the pieces that I put down, I tend to overlap slightly anyway, just to try and make sure that I'm not leaving gaps. Now working down the side of the nose, make sure you press that in nice and tightly to the side of the nose, and obviously tap it down on the top. And the same in here, getting the definition between the eyeball and the cheekbone. Just kind of allow your brush to follow that shape round that we've built up. And if you do need to pick it up and have a look, you know, don't be afraid to pick it up and kind of check it from different angles, especially while we still have the rays exposed. So we have something to hold on to. And then you can go in and add another piece across the top. Any bits that you might have missed, just tuck them in. So there's your first eye done. That's how you do it. You literally just paint a layer of the paper mache mixed, put your piece of kitchen roll on, dab it down, and just keep going and keep adding to it. So I'm going to carry on and do the rest of our son's face and then work around and do the spikes. And I'll speed it up for you so that you don't have to sit through the entire process. So I'll come back to you in a minute once all of this has its first coat on. this point, you should have your first layer of paper mache complete. Now I've just noticed there's some little yellow bits already starting to poke through, so I'm just going to go ahead and cover those up because the rest of it seems to be drying fairly well. Now, if the coverage is actually really good, you may get away with actually only doing one coat of paper mache and then just going in and painting it. So I'm just going to cover up the very sort of yellowy bits that are sticking out, because that's obviously where the paper mache is thinner just now. Obviously your whole piece is now relatively wet and covered in glue, so you do need to be careful and try not to pick it up, which does mean that if you're tucking in edges like I am here, you have to kind of guess a little bit where they are and just make sure they're kind of tucked in. Okay, so really the only other thing that you could do just now is to leave this to dry for a fair while. As I've said previously on paper mache classes, you can speed up the process by applying a hairdryer, and that will allow you to bring it to a dry enough state fairly quickly to allow you to do the next stage. And what we're going to be doing on the next stage is turning it over, so this side needs to be dry enough that we can handle it and turn it over and have it resting on our roll of tape so that we can actually apply the tape and the hook that we're going to be using for obviously hanging it up on the wall. So we need to be able to turn it over. So I'm just filling in these last couple of bits. You can tinker with this as much as you want, really, just covering it up, but the next thing we're going to do, as I say, is to dry it, and then once it's dry we'll work on fixing the hook onto the back, and we're going to paper mache the back as well. So not only will we be fixing the hook on with tape, but we will be then securing it with a layer of paper mache as well, so giving you the best possible chance of it staying fixed on, which obviously we want. Now thankfully, because we're just making this out of cardboard and paper mache, it's not super heavy, so it's not the hook's not going to need to carry an awful lot of weight, but we just want to make sure that it's not just going to kind of peel off the back. So there we go. I'm pretty happy with that coverage. So I will see you once the front of your sun is dried. So hopefully by this stage, your first layer of paper mache is relatively dry, you know, touch dry. It's not going to be dry all the way through because it obviously does need a good few hours to completely dry. But we're going to turn it over. Now, as you can see, the back on mine currently looks a little bit messy. It's where I've been folding the edges of the paper mache into the back. So all of these are also currently finishing off drying. But what we're going to do is we're going to add our hook on. Now, you're going to have to be careful, obviously, not to get that covered in paint and whatnot when you're painting your layer. Now, whilst it was drying, I went and had a rummage through my craft box and I found this kind of goldy colour ribbon. It's actually got some little white flowers on it, but I figured, you know, that was going to be good for this project. It's a nice gold colour. So we're going to basically we just need to cut off a strip of the ribbon and fix it to the back of your decoration. Now, it really depends on where you're planning on hanging this. Obviously you might want a really long hook on it, in which case you can make it much longer, or you may just want a fairly small hook if you're just wanting to hook it onto a hook that's already on the wall. But basically you just need to work out where you want it. So obviously we want it to be central so that it hangs straight.
So for my one, it's going to be between these two top rays. And that's kind of our center point that follows down the nose and down to the bottom point. For yours, it might be in a slightly different place. So I don't want a huge hoop on mine, but we want enough to be able to fix it securely and still have some space to hang. So I'm going to kind of measure out what I think I want. Cut through the ribbon. Put the excess to one side. Now what I think I'll do is probably put the flower design on the inside. So it's really just using the gold ribbon. And we're just going to stick it on. Now, you want your ribbon to be fairly secure, obviously. You can actually use like normal sellotape if your masking tape isn't particularly sticky. But bear in mind, you know, we are going to be adding paper mache over the top. So just trying to keep it as close to the center as you can. I'm going to put both ends next to each other rather than over each other because I want as much of it to be stuck down as I can. You can overlap them, especially if you're using stronger tape, but I want to make sure that it stays stuck. So I'm just going to overlap a few pieces of masking tape. Try not to squash any facial features underneath, especially if, like mine, you've got it resting on a piece of tape, or on a roll of tape rather. So you could do as much or as little to kind of cover it with tape as you feel comfortable with. Obviously check where your rays finish. I'm just going to put plenty on mine just to make sure. So there we go. That takes us right up to the top. Make sure that's really well pressed down. And then we're just going to go in and fill in the rest of the back with paper mache. So we're not going to spend too much time on this. It's flat. We don't have to sort of go around any awkward pieces. Most of the edges of all of your rays should already be done. So it's just the center parts. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to see if I've got some sort of fairly long, thin pieces that I can use for the centers of the rays. So you see here, just some fairly thin strips. Just tear some off. There we go. So what I'm going to do is go back into my jar of our paper mache mixture. Whoop. Bang it on the table and knock everything flying. Now, try not to get the mixture onto your ribbon if you can help it. If you get a tiny bit on there, it's not the end of the world, but obviously we want to try and keep that ribbon nice and clean. Knowing me, I'll probably get it on the ribbon because I'm messy like that. Okay, and then just start going in. Obviously, we've got these narrower strips, so my thinking is if we go in and start filling in the gaps on the rays, and obviously those little bits, you can fold back around to the front, or you can just kind of fold back on themselves so that you are literally just working on the back now. And just fill those in, tap them down. Not too worried about these loose pieces just now. I just want to get some edges on there. Try and get these rays covered up because the center part is going to be super easy and it's just going to be a case of filling in the patches. my jar's getting quite low. I'm going to have to make some more of my paper mache mixture soon. And what I'll probably do is I'll record that for you. When I top up my jar, I'll create like a quick 2-minute video showing you how I make it, because I know that I've described it for you in the past and I've kind of made it on the go on one of my videos. But I'll just make a quick kind of how-to video, if you like, so you can see what I actually put in mine and how I eyeball the measurements until I've got it about right. So again, we'll fill in the gaps on the next ray. Overlapping the pieces as we go. And here, where I've got this straight line where the tape is underneath the ribbon, I'm just going to use one of our straight edge pieces of kitchen roll. And dab that into place. At this point, you might get the tiniest bit onto the back of that ribbon, but that's not going to show through to the front. So if it's just at the very edge, that's fine. You kind of want to make sure that this paper mache is like totally over all of the tape, so that as it dries, it's keeping it nicely tightly fixed to the back of our decoration. Once again, when you get to this point and you've got the back all covered, just leave that to dry. So once you've put your paper mache on the back and allowed it to dry, it's time to turn it back over and have a look at your front. So this is the point where you need to decide whether the coverage is good enough to paint as it is, or whether there are some areas that are quite thin that you just want to add another layer to. So I'm going to go ahead and just touch up this one. Now bear in mind, if you have done your edges quite well on your rays, then really it's mainly the detailed parts, like the raised parts, that may need the extra coat, and you might just get away with doing the quicker parts on the inside rather than having to spend lots of time fiddling around on the edges. So I'm just going to go in and touch up some bits here and there. There's a few rays that the covering is quite thin on, so I'm going to put a second coat on those. Once you're happy with your second coat, it's time to leave it to properly dry. So I would recommend giving this overnight and coming back to it tomorrow to add your paint. Welcome back. So hopefully by now your pretty celestial sun decoration has dried nicely and you've left it overnight and you've been patient. Now it is time to paint it. So you can choose what colours you paint it. It's entirely up to you. I'm going to use this gorgeous cadmium yellow. It's a really nice kind of golden yellow. So I'm going to use that for my base colour. And then what I'm going to do is use some of my Liquitex gold paint to just add a little bit of shimmer to it. I'm not sure if I've shown you how I do that yet. I've done it on some of my other larger pen pots. If you've seen pictures of the snake one that I did. In fact, here, let me grab it. So this was kind of done in an opposite way. So you see the background here. This was painted in gold, and then I actually used black to kind of give it this sort of old antique-y type look. But it's the same technique. And what we're going to be doing, or what I'm going to be doing for this one, is using the yellow and then adding the gold over the top to just kind of give it some highlights and accents. Now, it's up to you. You could get really fancy. You could maybe grab an orange paint, or you could get a different shade of yellow, and you could alternate the rays. You could have, yellow, orange all the way around, or you could decide that you're going to do each ray half yellow and half orange. You can really play around with this and make it as fancy as you like. Or you know what? You might decide that you want your sunshine to be purple. And that's perfectly okay too. So you can choose. I'm going to go with the cadmium yellow. So I'm going to pop some of that into my palette. A dollop of that. I'm going to roll up my sleeves so that I don't put my arm in the paint. And we are going to get painting. Dip that in. I've got my brush that we used for the bumblebee pen pots, my wide flat brush, because I find it's really good for kind of getting in the little creases. So I'm just going to start dabbing that over. So you get a nice even coat. You get all the little white flecks. And basically all you need to do is, if you're following the same technique as me, you're just going to follow my direction in painting the whole thing in the yellow, and then I'll show you how to add the gold. If you are painting in different colours, then you just carry on and you can pick up once it's painted. And once you have your first coat on, you guessed it, you need to leave it to dry. But the good news is this thin layer of acrylic paint isn't going to take very long. So set it to one side for 15-20 minutes, or if you've got a hairdryer on hand, then give it a blast and it will take no time at all to dry. And then we can give the back of it a quick coat and do the same, and then we can add the final details. Okay, so once the front is dry, which mine nearly is, have a look at it and decide if yours is going to need a second coat, or if you think your first coat is thick enough to cover it nicely. So we're going to carefully turn it over. Now I've got my roll of tape underneath just so that I'm not sitting it directly on the table below. So all we're going to do is go in and put a coat on the back. once again, once you've done this coat, just leave it for another 15-20 minutes and let it dry. So once the back's dry, flip it back over and just have a look at the front and decide if you want to or if you need to put a second coat on. So I'm going to have a quick look and I'm going to touch up some little bits where the paint was missed last time, where there's tiny little white bits showing through, and just fill those in. Any other patches where it's maybe slightly lighter and not covered very well. You may decide that you just want to do a complete coat just to make sure that you haven't missed any bits, and that's fine. You could do that too. Just kind of going into the obvious parts here. Now I think I'm going to call it a day for my yellow colour. So what I'm going to do, because I've literally just touched up some small areas, I'm going to just grab my hairdryer, which incidentally is covered in paint, and give it a quick blast. Now, one of the main reason why I'm not going to give it a complete second coat is because I don't know if it picks up too well on the camera, but there's actually lots of slightly darker bits and lighter bits, and so it already kind of gives it an almost two-tone effect. And we've got darker yellow patches and lighter yellow patches here, and I just really like the way that it's dried. And if I was to go in and put a second coat on there, it would basically make it all that kind of darker yellow. So I'm going to keep the kind of natural highlights that have formed. But I'm going to get some of my gold paint in my palette. Now we're not going to need a lot because we're not going to be painting on thickly. Now there's a couple of ways that you can do this. You can actually do this with your finger, but I'm not sure whether your parents would approve of that. So we're going to do it with the paintbrush and kind of use the same technique. If you were going to do it with your finger, you dip your finger in ever so lightly to just get a small amount on there, and generally have like some kitchen roll on hands to wipe off the excess, and then using the bit that's left, you just kind of lightly brush it over these raised areas. But we can create the same effect with a paintbrush. So I'm just rinsing out my brush, getting the yellow paint out. I'm going to dab it dry on a piece of kitchen roll, because we want our brush to actually be dry for this, or at least fairly dry. With most acrylic paints, you start with a kind of wet paintbrush. So our brush is actually relatively dry now, and we're going to dip it in some of the paint, but then kind of dab off most of the paint back into the palette, so we don't have an excess on our brush. And then on these raised parts, I'll show you, if you don't want to be kind of pushing down into the grooves like we did with the yellow, where we were trying to get it into all of the creases, we're now just going to be brushing it lightly over the raised area. So all of these bits that are sticking up like wrinkles, if you just lightly put your brush over them, it picks up this tiny bit of gold that gives it this kind of antique-y feel to it. You kind of just want it to mainly catch the raised parts and not so much the deeper, flatter parts. So that's why you just brush over it really lightly to catch the edges. So you just work with ever so thin layers, like really small amounts. I don't know if you can see that on the camera. It's just catching and starting to create this kind of shimmer. There are actually like gold powders and things you can get, like gold rubs that do similar things. But for the purposes of this, just gold acrylic paint works perfectly well. So we're just going to catch more of these edges, more of these creases. We're just going to work our way around the sun. There we go. Now it's entirely up to you if you want to do the same on the reverse. So if you're having it somewhere that it's going to be able to swing around and around and people are going to see the back, then you might want to go in and add some of this gold detail onto the back as well, just so that it shimmers and catches the light. If you're going to be mounting it somewhere against a wall and nobody's ever going to see the back, then there's no need to waste your gold paint. So that is really it. If you decide to add any more detail, then now is the time to do it. But that, my friends, is your celestial sun hanging decoration, ready to adorn any wall or bedroom or living room or even kitchen. I would absolutely love to see your pictures, so please remember to take photos and share them in the private members Facebook group so that we can all cheer you on and tell you how wonderfully you have done, because I am absolutely positive that you will also create some really beautiful suns that you'll be super happy with. Take care for now, guys, and I'll see you soon.